Welcome back to Often Wrong. In today's episode, we're talking about revolution. We're going to explore what revolution really means and how it's not always what you think, including how many people are needed to make it stick. Do we have it? Spoiler alert, we might. So we're going to get into that on this podcast today. We're going to talk about big-scale revolutions, small-scale revolutions, and revolutionary thinking. So let's get into it. Hi, people. Thank you so much for listening. We love bringing you these conversations with experts that we think you should know and remind you all that it's okay to be wrong because we model this for you every single week right here on this podcast. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel, like this episode, and most importantly, hit that notification bell to stay up to date for when the next episode is live. The more of you that engage, the better guests we can get. So honestly, this is for you, not for us. Thank you. Let's get into it.
Welcome to Often Wrong, the podcast about getting it wrong and why that shouldn't stop the conversation. I'm your host, Claire Cornetta.
And I'm Lisa Nwankwo.
In today's episode, we're talking about revolution. Shout out to Tracy Chapman, the GOAT. We're going to explore what revolution really means and how it's not always what you think. Revolution doesn't always mean war and violence. In fact, revolutionary things happen every day as a result of effort and community and all sorts of very beautiful nonviolent things.
Yeah, today we're going to talk about different ways that revolution can manifest itself, whether it's small acts of resistance or large-scale social movements. We're going to discuss the importance of understanding the history of revolution and the role that it's played so far in shaping our world and, honestly, very specifically, the U.S. So big question of the day is, what is a revolution and how can we use it to create a more just world? I think that's typically what it's for. Maybe not always. Claire, when you think about revolution, what do you think of first?
Okay, so I'm going to give an annoying answer. And possibly it's easier for me to reduce it to definitions. So I get a little technical because I'm like, okay, revolution is a systems-based change. It's not just okay, if I'm thinking about what other words come to mind, like what does revolution evoke? Which these are very different things, but insurgencies, coup d'etat, insurrections, things like that, which are all violent. Yes.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how my brain, it just incorporates those things. But this
I think that's true for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think so too. And so, when I'm thinking about revolution, I think about the systems-based approach. And I remind myself that, insurgencies, insurrections, coup d'etat, all are very specific modes and driven by, a coup d'etat is from within. A coup is happening from within, and it's like an ousting of a political leader, and it happens from within the government itself. An insurgency is like a group that is usually a non-state group that comes in, and again, it's more about overthrowing than it is about implementing systems change. So revolution is much bigger to me, and it involves just that, a systems change. Yeah. So, which to me is way loftier. Okay, from a project management perspective, if I was going to plan a revolution or I was going to plan an insurgency, I'd pick an insurgency. It's just easier,
Yeah. Makes a splash.
Yeah. It's just you got to do one thing. I'm even okay, if I'm the insurgent project manager, I'm thinking, okay, I need to have my plan to overthrow, and then I just need to have my little plan to implement the new thing, which is just my new regime, and then I'll be good to go.
Yeah.
But revolution is okay, so we gotta talk about how the system's failing, how it's not working right now, and then the revolution oftentimes puts forward suggestions, but it doesn't usually, and potential leaders, but it doesn't seek to replace all of it. It's not like a one-to-one thing. You know what I mean? So revolutions are more daunting, but they're also extremely transformative.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to talk about the nonviolent methods of revolution today, I think, and learn and, you know, think about some of the greats who've done it beautifully and, you know, talk about present, past, and future.
Well, I certainly have a lot to say about revolutions, whether they're violent or nonviolent. But I do have actually a specific thing to talk about later today.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I have a definition of a revolution if that helps ground this conversation.
Let's hear it.
So, what I found is a revolution is a radical change in the established order, usually the established government and social institutions, which is basically what you just said, but, you know, just to get some big words around the concept we're talking about today.
I could have also used big words, but I just chose not to, just
Yeah.
to appeal to the masses.
Yeah, of course.
But I have a
How
great
benevolent of you.
vocabulary, I can assure you.
Definitely.
Yeah.
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 I think revolution is so interesting to think about because if you're thinking about it in those terms of that definition, it's just a change in the established order. So I would say you could argue that a revolution is happening right now. And I think that could be evidenced by something as small as how the US government currently and has been speaking to us through social media, on the stage, like kind of the patterns of speech and how we communicate, whether we have like presidential candidates posting memes, you know, there's like things that are just slowly changing over time, which is changing the established order. And also like how these different parties speak to each other and like bully each other at debates. Like that's kind of new-ish. And I think this is also kind of further evidenced by how like the dismantling or even the slow breakdown of how the government is playing out right now. This is like, you know, like elected officials. We expect that everyone who's going to be on the main stage with the president is going to be someone that we elected or someone that we've heard of before. And that's not necessarily happening anymore. For example, like and this isn't like a bipartisan issue. Like
Wait, we didn't elect Elon Musk?
Sorry. No, actually, I didn't see him on my ballot, but I don't know. I can't speak for all states.
He was on mine.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Maybe it was implied. I don't know.
Maybe, yeah. Huh. Funny.
But I feel like this is like not a bipartisan issue because I don't mean to say this like, oh, our current president, Donald J. Trump, is dismantling and revolutionizing the government. This has already been happening. Like I remember last spring, the U.S. House Office of Diversity and Inclusion was disbanded last spring, which I was really shocked by because you kind of think when something like that is created, it's going to last. Like, we're like, well, obviously that is needed. That's why they made it. You know, why would the House make something that they didn't need? So rolling it back felt kind of, that is the established institution.
How interesting that no one's talking about that in the wake of all of this. That
right.
Like, it's totally convenient to me when we get a new leader and people don't understand that, like, and it goes both ways 100%, but people don't. And there's no reason for people to understand it because our government is opaque and it's not for everyone. And it's difficult to understand. But like, there's so much that's happened from the past administration that is bleeding into this administration. You can't tell the difference. Like, there are executive orders that are still like rolling in from the last stuff. And one of the things that people really should understand is like, the budgets are set by the prior administration. So this flip-flop we've had between Trump and Biden, and like it's like Biden was dealing with Trump's budgets and then Trump is going to be dealing with Biden's budgets. Like, it's wild. So there's a lot of misunderstanding here. And but yeah, I think it's in the context of today's conversation. It's when you get part of the story, I think it makes the context in which we need to revolutionize something very difficult to operate in because we don't have the full story.
Or a thought that I was having as we were preparing for this episode is that maybe U.S. history is just a series of revolutions and counter-revolutions all of the time.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a favorite recent one that comes to mind?
I do, actually. So we had Black Lives Matter And that was very revolutionary in how it played out. I think it invoked a lot of memories of US history. And it was a pretty exciting time. And now we have a counter revolution to Black Lives Matter. And you can see that in like anti woke legislation, woke being a term that was specifically stolen from Black liberation movements. And then also the dismantling of DEI. And I think that's really interesting to look at because I feel like a counter revolution is evidence that the first revolution worked and that it was doing something.
Interesting. Yeah.
Because I would say now there's all of these stories about how we can't do DEI because it's making the white children feel bad about themselves. And that's not true. I don't think that that is real. Maybe Bobby felt bad, but more likely is that it's not
Poor
about
Bobby.
that. It's about not letting students know that revolution has happened this whole time.
Also, I'm sorry, but kids are feeling bad because they're on social media, not because they're learning sad things in school.
Yeah, because their schools don't have any budgets. They probably feel bad about that.
Yeah. Also, like,
there's no lunch.
I mean, I have a lot of feelings about this, but I've heard like, things like kids being upset about learning about climate change, and it's like very much weighing on them. And I understand that, but I think so much of this is reinforced from social media. But like also there are really beautiful ways, like if you're teaching Black history in schools, it should not be upsetting only. Like that's wrong.
It doesn't make sense. And isn't in line with what Black history teachers were doing. That doesn't really
100%
wasn't the story.
Right. And like if you're talking like Black liberation and like, I mean, beautiful movements of our times, there's so much beauty there. Why are we talking about like no one's saying, oh my God, Bobby, your ancestors did some fucked up shit. Like, no one's saying
Bobby,
that.
You're terrible.
Bobby, you suck. I will say, I don't think I've told this story, but I remember specifically, I've told you this story. I had like 2 Black classmates when I was a little kid in white suburbia, Denver, Colorado. And I remember learning about slavery when I was like 8 or something, like young. And it was like an anecdotal, like, I don't even remember how we were learning about it. And I was in line at lunch and I turned to my friend Rayvon and I was like, Rayvon, I'm so sorry about slavery. And he was like, it's okay. I was like, it's awful. I got through it. I came out the other side of my brief interaction. Rayvon and I fixed things. It was okay. Brave. I atoned for centuries of my race's sins. But
it's important. It needed to happen.
Yeah. Also, like, what a beautiful, like, earnest thing, like a child. Like, I was just like, man, fuck, I'm sorry, you're Black. Like, fuck. I was a little kid. I was a child. Like, let's all relax.
I've been on the other side of that conversation a lot of times, actually. And you know what? It's nice.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's nice where we can all be in it together and have these conversations. And I feel like, I don't know, in my kind of extensive history working with children, that's probably what was more likely going to happen. But we digress because really this is about how removing DEI and talking about race in schools has had such a big backlash since 2020 and the big moment for Black Lives Matter. So I just think that is my favorite example of a revolution and honestly a counter revolution because there's no need to counter revolutionize unless the revolution was getting somewhere.
Yeah. How interesting. Yeah. I think that's a great point.
Let's talk about, today I want to talk about big scale revolutions, small scale ones, and revolutionary thinking before we get to this idea of like what we're all getting wrong here and maybe like some things we can identify here.
Yeah.
So today, a revolution in this context, we're talking about a big change in how a country is run. That usually happens when people are unhappy with the government and they want to replace it. Sometimes it's peaceful, sometimes it is not. I think a lot of times people in the US specifically, because that is my sample population, they can only connect the idea of revolution to something like the Revolutionary War or like bloodshed, because typically when you hear about revolution, it's going to be in US media that is going to show like a bloody revolution. It's going to show, and I think maybe that's by design, it's to show that it's so big and vast. You can't possibly do it on your own, and you're going to lose everything if you do. And I think that is a really interesting placement of what revolution means, especially because our whole country was founded on the idea of revolution. So I have this quote from Abraham Lincoln, which, to be very clear, this is just a retweet and not an endorsement. But I'm not going to go too far into that. But he said, "Let every American, every lover of liberty, every well-wisher to his posterity swear by the blood of the revolution, never to violate in the least particular the laws of the country and never to tolerate their violation by others." And so I think that's really interesting. These are like one of the defining quotes of the United States. So it's like interesting that here we are today where people think that revolution has nothing to do with us and only happens on the news in other countries with bloodshed, when meanwhile, that's where we came from as a country of people.
Mm-hmm.
It's in the Declaration of Independence. It is in the Pennsylvania Bill of Rights, which is where everything started. My hometown, Philadelphia.
Yes. Yes.
So I think it's just interesting. The revolution has been the DNA of the U.S. since its birth. Basically, in the Pennsylvania Bill of Rights, it says all power is inherent to the people, and all free governments are founded on their authority and instituted for their peace, safety, and happiness. For the advancement of these ends, they have at all times an inalienable and indefeasible right to alter, reform, or abolish their government in such manner as they may think proper. Which, powerful. That's
great.
That makes the U.S. sound like what it's supposed to be.
All power to all the people. I mean,
literally
shit,
all the
that's
time.
Like a really exciting. I'm like the Pennsylvania Bill of Rights is kind of getting me hyped up right now. It did not say all the people, but that's
no, some of the people.
Yeah, some of the people.
We're scholars. We can decipher however we see fit.
Yeah, exactly. I'm gonna infer.
But I think, like, just not to make this all about the U.S., one thing, and this was kind of like early on, I think I was early in college, I was listening to this NPR thing about Tupac and the Arab Spring. And I was like, oh, I have to listen to that. I love Tupac. So that was great. And I learned a lot from that. And that kind of really informed a lot of the ways that I think about revolutions now. So if you were to think about the Middle East, all of these different countries were very tightly wound because of authoritarian rule that was being exerted in different ways and at different pressures across different countries. And then in 2010, something changed in Tunisia, and this wave of energy that came from that made it other springs pop up across Arab countries. So these were all pro-democracy uprisings. They spread really quickly. People power was really important. Some went further than others. And it was just like a big time of revolution across many different countries. So the outcomes were mixed. Some of them were super violent. Some of them were not. Some of them worked with heavy quotes, because you can't really see the effects of a revolution until much, much later. But I think it's just interesting to me to think that they're all categorized as the Arab Spring, but in all these different countries, it went better than others.
Yeah.
Versus in other countries, even though they were all part of this same group. So that makes me think a lot about revolutions now and how I feel about them as I see them pop up throughout the world and in the US, is that we don't have revolutions because we're sure that they're going to work. We have them because we're sure that what's happening now is not working. And so you don't necessarily need to have, you know, a 10-point plan or something in place, but you just have to know that what's happening now is not working.
Yeah. Wow. I think that's really beautiful. Yeah, I'm curious. I have a lot of questions here because, again, this kind of gets to what I was saying earlier, because it's like and I am joking about like being the project manager of an insurgency, but like if you are thinking about who are the right people to do these things, who are the right people to like, the right people to call things out is anyone who's it's not fitting, right? Like you can be a revolutionary, anyone can, right? I would say not anyone can design a representative government or system for the people. So like how do we reconcile? I mean, like how do we reconcile? Then where do we go? you know?
Yeah. I think that's really interesting. And also, okay, so originally when we were talking about doing this episode, we wanted to have a guest on. And then
Mm.
as I'm thinking about this episode, I'm like, this actually is the answer to this question, which is you want to bring in, and maybe we will have to if we get stuck here, but you want to bring in like an expert on revolutions.
Yeah.
But none of the revolutionaries were experts. They
Right.
just did it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, it's not necessarily, I think it's just an important place. And us doing this by ourselves today is an interesting way to approach this conversation because
Yeah.
revolutions happen by everyday citizens
Yeah.
and revolutionary acts happen all of the time. It doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily call for an immediate big scale revolution, but
Change. Yeah.
yeah,
But it's the calling out. Yeah. And you're, yes, I'm aligned on the, like, it's for anyone, but it's like, yeah. And I guess the immediacy is what I conflate because it's
hmm
like, again, with coups, insurgencies, etc., like it's immediate.
yeah,
Somebody dies. It's an assassination. It's a overthrow. Like it happens immediately and you replace it. Revolutions take time, as you've said. And
yeah,
so it allows people who know how to design healthcare systems, to go off of our other episode with Luigi. Like that
yeah.
was perhaps an act of revolution, but it wasn't a revolution in itself, what he
It didn't
did.
bring about an immediate revolution.
No,
Even
it did
like the
not. And
insurrection,
that's right, right,
revolutionary
exactly.
action did not bring about a revolution.
Right,
It actually
exactly.
brought about Joe Biden.
Yes. Yes. Joe Biden as a counter revolution. Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
No, but true, exactly. Yeah. And I think that, it's a really interesting place to be in when you're watching it unfold quicker, or you're
Yeah.
watching like there will always be moments in time that move things forward really quickly, and then it'll be like, oh, what's happening, like where is that, but work is being done behind the scenes. So I just think
Yeah.
it's very interesting, but I think the timing thing is what I have to remind myself of. And
Totally.
yeah.
And also sometimes in revolutionary acts, you are just putting a stopgap on the harm
Yeah.
without another plan.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
yeah, I think there's just a lot of different ways to go about it.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's really interesting because, okay, so I had this quote that I wanted to mention today. This is from Victor Hugo, where he said, the brutalities of progress are called revolutions. When they are over, we realize that the human has been roughly handled, but it has advanced, which I
Mm.
think is really lovely because, we're going to talk more about like violent versus nonviolent revolutions. There is always some violence inflicted, but there is always violence anyway. So that's kind of like a heavy thing to measure out when it's appropriate to change the types of violence that happen.
Mm.
But I also think it's funny because as the day that we're recording this, I think it was either last night or 2 nights ago at the governor's ball at the White House that was thrown by Donald Trump and Melania Trump, the U.S. Army chorus sang "Can You Hear the People Sing" from Les Mis, which is so crazy because I saw in all the comments, they're like, oh my God, they don't even know what they're singing. Like, I can't believe they would do that. And I was like, no, they also think they are revolutionaries. Like this, they think they're you. Like we are. I think that's such an interesting thing that's being missed right now. And also like plays into this idea that I'm having that like revolution is happening all of the time.
Wow.
So, okay, before we dive deeper, why do you think people are so afraid of revolutions
I
or
was actually going
dismissive
to
of
ask you
it?
that
Something
question.
I've noticed. Oh,
Yeah.
well, I think it's because people don't know, people can't see it. And that's kind of what I'm hoping to get to in this conversation is maybe making people realize that it's inevitable. And so I think people are like, oh, no, we can't do that. Like, we have to go to work. I need to pay my bills. Like, I can't possibly be involved in a revolution. And it's like, well, you're in a revolution whether you want to or not. So,
Yeah. I will add an answer, which
mhm.
is if you are part of a system that is not working for a lot of people, but it's working for you, you don't want it to change,
So true. But
right?
is this working for I can't think of anyone who this would be working for.
No,
I could see people not noticing it maybe, but
I have not met anyone ever who has been like, I am satisfied with the way the government is running. I am satisfied with the amount of tax I pay. I am satisfied with where my taxes are going. I am satisfied with, and I feel represented in my government.
mm,
At any point in history, I don't remember meeting anyone like that. So,
no, neither do I.
I think there's something to be said for that, for sure.
Hmm.
But it's like, but I think also people have a hard time seeing how they fit into it, like you
Yeah,
said, right?
for sure.
So, and they also have a hard time seeing that things for the masses are good for everyone for the most part. I think we're excluding the extractive, um, maniacal people at the top who are
Yeah.
puppeteering and getting exactly what they want and billions of dollars. But
Yeah.
neither here nor there.
Okay. Well, then I think the other piece too is that people, I don't know, it feels like it gets invoked all of the time, like the Constitution and,
Yeah.
make America great again. But when America was first founded, it was founded on this idea of a right to revolution.
Yes.
So I think maybe people they can't connect the dots on those two things. And it's
Yeah.
like, well, I don't have a musket. I can't possibly be involved in a revolution.
You don't have a
That's not what
musket?
they mean. No,
That's so
I've never
crazy.
even seen one, honestly. Actually, I'm sure I have growing up in
That's
Pennsylvania.
so crazy. I have like 3.
Wow, Colorado's crazy.
Yeah, Colorado's crazy. Actually, I'm in California, so California's crazy. Both true. Yeah, I mean, I think it's really beautiful to think about the spirit of revolution. And when I'm speaking about like this country and the government that is here now and that hasn't been around very long, we're
Yeah.
still pretty fucking new, which
Babies. Yeah.
we're babies. I mean, we just hit quarter millennium. I mean, are we at 250 yet?
Not
250
even.
years? Not
Almost.
even.
But
Like,
that's the other thing too, is I think people like forget how young the US is. And it's like, well,
oh, that would be
we
2026,
gave it,
right? Yes.
yeah. And it's like, oh, we gave it our best shot. I guess
Yeah.
this is what it is. It's like, no, we've tried nothing.
We're new. We're babies. We're children. Like we're like toddlers right now. Like this is such a short amount of time
Like
to
boss
judge.
baby.
Yeah, exactly. It feels very resonant. But I think honestly, it's really interesting to think about how, and like I am very proud of the fact and kind of astonished by the fact that we codified these things. And yes, at the time it was written, was it just about white men, landowning white men? Sure, yes. However,
Perhaps.
like maybe a little bit.
Did they ever
asterisk.
think that you and I would be doing a podcast about this?
No,
way.
they didn't. I bet they didn't even know what podcasts were.
No, idiots.
Crazy. But to me, it's like there's so much that's strong in a lot of these doctrines, right? If we
Yeah.
look at elements of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, like really beautiful things were written there and ideas that can actually now apply to everyone in a lot of ways. But it was very different. I think also one of the huge differences that I'm digressing and I will get back to topic, but like we are so big now.
Mhm.
We have not been alive very long and we have 350 million Americans. It's compared to I would really love to look up the numbers of like how many people there were. I feel like it was like 10 million people, if
Yeah.
that, at the time of like the American Revolution, like crazy little numbers. And so thinking about revolution in that context and then now in this context, it's crazy. So
It is crazy.
there's a lot there. And I think we would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge the strengths of these documents while also saying, hey, we should also make them representative of
Absolutely.
all
Well,
the people,
actually-
but also the size of our country.
I'm glad you brought that up because even in the Declaration of Independence, they have the word, it's actually your duty to revolutionize. Not that it's your right, but it's also your duty. And I think that is really, it gets lost.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that will make you be like, sing the proud to be an American song, like all those songs that
Yes.
played after 9/11. These are the things that make you get there by being like, yes, we the
100%.
people. And
Yes.
it gets lost.
Yeah. Well, and also it gets lost that this is what the founding fathers would have wanted. They wanted
Mm-hmm.
progress. They wanted the country to grow and progress. Like I don't think they could have conceptualized how, but like also look at the times. Like, okay,
Yeah.
it was very different.
Very.
We had a lot of issues, but like they wanted progress for this
Mm-hmm.
nation. And they
And who's to
recognized it
say?
was an inherent part of growth. I mean,
Yeah.
like I just don't understand fundamentalism as a principle or practice.
No.
I don't get that
Well,
at
it
all.
also, because it's like if they were here, you could imagine that they would also be easily swayed by brand deals, lobbying. And I love that I called lobbying brand deals, but that's what they are.
That's
And
sweet. That's iconic. The
But,
government's brand deals.
that's honestly how the government should go. Get in while you have your fresh, beautiful ideas about the people and leave before you become a villain.
Yes, true. Oh my god.
So if I was a
That is
revolutionary leader, maybe that's what I would put in place. But
that's the way to do it,
mhm,
honestly. I
constant cycling.
really respect that.
Okay, so I read this article from the BBC. This is from 2019. This is research that was conducted by Erica Chenoweth, who is a political scientist at Harvard University. And I thought this was crazy that the magic number for revolutions and protests is 3.5%. To put that into terms for the United States, that is 11 million people. She found in her studies up until 2019, I have not checked to see if she's updated since then, but at the time of 2019, any movement that had the support of 3.5% of the people has never failed in the history of the world.
Wow. Like revolutionary movement, not like
Mm-hmm.
bill passage. Yeah.
Yeah. But that too, honestly.
That's wow. How
Yeah.
interesting.
And
So
she
what
is
you're saying is we should be organizing. And
literally,
yeah.
literally always. But also, and then also you're organizing whether you want to or not. So,
Right.
but it's also another thing that she found was that nonviolent campaigns were twice as likely to succeed as violent ones. As
That's a cool
53%
number.
at the time compared to 26% for violent protests. And I thought that was so interesting because coming back to my most favorite, most recent revolutionary act of Black Lives Matter, as a person who was on the ground a lot in Black Lives Matter protests in Brooklyn in 2020, these were not violent protests. They were very peaceful. We were singing songs. People were handing out waters and masks and taking care of each other. It was like honestly one of the most beautiful things I've ever been a part of.
Wow.
But when I turned on the news, all you saw was violent Black Lives Matter protests. And so reading those stats, I was like, oh, this makes sense why they would make revolutionary actions seem more violent than they are in the media, because people move away from them and they are less likely to work if they are seen as violent.
Wow. Wow.
Isn't that crazy?
That's incredible, actually. And I love that you were a part of that. I'll be totally honest. Never been to a protest in my life.
Really?
Mm-mm. I am so supportive. I am so supportive. I think it's so beautiful. I am very civically engaged.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is about my constitution. Maybe it's the fact that I am a Cancer. Let's blame my astro chart. I don't want to go.
Yeah.
I won't go.
Honestly,
anything.
I think that's really interesting because I was thinking about this. Same thing with Black Lives Matter. Before I went, this is actually how I got together with my wife, was we started going to Black Lives Matter protests together. And with the perfect Aquarius date is a protest and maybe a taco afterwards.
I love that. Cute.
But we used to, before that, I was very afraid to go because I was watching on the news. And even though Black Lives Matter is something, I went to a march for Black Lives Matter back in, I think, 2017 in Philadelphia, where it was very small.
Yeah.
No one cared, but it felt good to be in community and doing these things. In 2020 in New York, I didn't want to go because on the news it looked so scary and we were just coming out of lockdown.
No shit. Yeah.
And so I was really afraid to go. And then I find out that my wife had been going and she was like, no, it's not like that at all. Please come out. And I was like, okay, I'll go with you. And that's how I found out. So I could see why a lot of people would never go to a protest because
I love that.
It looks like cars on fire and people getting shot with rubber bullets. And that does happen. It's never happened to me. I've never even seen it, honestly. And I went to many.
I love that for you. Mine has nothing to do with that. I remember, I think the only thing akin to anything like this, I've never even been to Pride, which is like, please revoke my gay card.
Oh my God.
Never been. Never really wanted to go. I think I don't like crowds because I remember going on a Race for the Cure breast cancer walk with my mom when I was 7, and I could not wait to get out of there. It was October. I was like, I need to leave. I should not be here. And I think maybe I equate that experience to what protesting would be like.
No, that's super real. And sometimes I'm the same way. I don't love crowds. One time I was at AIDS Walk and when I was 16 years old and it was too crowded. People kept bumping into me and I had a full tantrum and I had to step off to the side and sit for 20 minutes and be like, get away from me.
But do I love an EDM show? Yeah. Have I been in a pit? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what's wrong with me? I don't know either. Maybe I just need a beat. And maybe honestly, Black Lives Matter protests.
That would have been a good one. There were beats. So, certainly.
What's wrong with me? Yeah, we can delve into that another day. But I think this is really interesting, and I do feel like I'm very excited to get into the bigger elements here of revolutions and.
Okay. So based on those stats, I have 2 examples of revolutions. These happened in other countries. So we had apartheid era South Africa, where Black citizens started doing boycotts of products that were from companies that were white owned. We see a lot of stuff that's happening current day in the US that is the same way. These things work because this result was a major economic crisis in South Africa that contributed to the end of segregation in the early 1990s. So completely nonviolent, but it made an impact. This was revolutionary. You had enough support of the people to make a real difference in the country, and then a difference had to be made as a result of that.
Yeah.
So there's that one. And then we have a failed uprising in Bahrain in 2011. And this campaign had critical mass. But what happened is it split up into a lot of competing factions. So because of that, we lost cohesion, we had infighting, we may have had violence. That ultimately prevented this movement from gaining enough momentum to bring about the change that it needed. That's not to say this was the people's fault, but I thought that was matched up with this research from Erica Chenoweth, who said that you needed 3.5%. And that's something that can quickly happen. And I think you see it happening in the US all the time where people are people are pitted against each other, even though they're on the same side. And that breaks it apart enough. If you see violence, if you see people fighting with each other, people will be like, well, that's not going to work. I'm not going to get involved. And that is a quick way to kill a revolution.
Yeah. Wow. How interesting. That's also my best friend lives in Bahrain and works for the embassy there.
Ooh.
Yeah. But I think that's so interesting. I also think these small scale examples that you've given, I don't know. I think there are a lot of lessons in there, but it does make me wonder how, what does it look like to scale in the US? I know the recent examples and stuff, but God, organizing 11 million people is crazy. to think about.
But you can, because if you think back to like, and this is why what I was saying earlier about the counter revolution to Black Lives Matter, we definitely had 11 million people.
For sure.
For sure.
I mean, even like, oh God, when was that huge wave of protests that happened? Was it abortion rights? God, I really need to just go to something. But it was, I mean, we had like record numbers of protests.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or protesters. And I was like, wow. And I was just sitting in my bed. Wow, look at that.
Not all revolutionary activities are for everyone. Like some people are good at teachers and sharing information. People are good at teachers. People are good at teaching and sharing examples and kind of guiding the way theoretically. There are other people who are better on the ground in the streets leading a march. There are people that are better at the state house. You know, there's just so many different ways, and not to say that everyone should be involved. I actually don't think, as a person who's been to a lot of protests in my day, I don't think it's a problem that you haven't. So all this to say, if we're thinking about big scale revolutions, small scale revolutions, I actually think the most important revolution is the one that happens in your brain. And that's revolutionary thinking. And I think that is kind of the thing that I want to invite people to take a look at with this conversation. Okay, so for example, I am from the United States. I'm from Philadelphia. I grew up with revolutionary thinking in this way. Like I said, I'm an Aquarius. That's in my DNA. Now I live in Mexico City, where we have a new president.
But for tax reasons, you live in Denver, Colorado. Just
absolutely.
Yes.
You have to live somewhere.
Yes.
Even if you leave the country. It's not my fault. But yeah, so this is, Presidenta Claudia Sheinbaum, she of the Morena Party, who has been in power. She's the second administration of the Morena Party, and which is so interesting. Fun fact: Morena Party was a third party in Mexico. So I know in the U.S. everyone's like, you can't vote for third party; they'll never win. Guess what? They can.
Yeah.
And they won.
Big.
So the big saying of the Morena Party in Mexico is por el bien de todos, primero los pobres, which means for the good of all, the poor first, which is revolutionary. When do you hear a government saying something like that in present day?
Yeah.
And I think I've heard this quote that was about how progressive thinking has to come from below. It has to come from the people. And I think that's really interesting because it sounds like the Morena Party of Mexico is in line with that thinking. But also, we have Donald Trump, who a lot of people in the United States, at least, of the 30-some% that voted for him, they think he is doing the same thing and that he is putting the poor first, the underrepresented blue-collar Americans. So I think that's really interesting because me as a citizen, I am definitely not reckless enough to think that I know for sure. Like everything I see Presidenta Claudia doing seems perfect and flawless. I'm not crazy enough to think that she might not do something incorrect in the future.
Yeah.
I'm also not reckless enough to think that of all of Donald Trump's million ideas, many of which seem very bad and damaging, maybe he might get right one time.
Yeah.
You never know.
Yeah.
Because you just can't really trust the government to do everything wrong or everything right or anything at all.
100%. So. Totally. Yeah. And there can be some good, some bad. And then some of the good can be undone by someone else trying to look good. So, yep, totally. I mean, yeah, that's a whole separate conversation. But I think that revolutionary thinking, it's so real as a, like that is probably what I enjoy the most is thinking and these conversations. And like all kidding aside, that is why we started this podcast, right? It's to help people think more critically, not to tell people what to think, but to think more critically and understand, lean into the kinds of conversations that will yield great new ideas and great, new approaches to things, and leaning into the discomfort of conversation and being okay with being wrong, all of that. So yeah, I'm curious about the states in which we think best as, revolutionaries or revolutionaries in our own mind? What do you?
I think the easiest time for it is in a state of crisis, which feels counterproductive, but
Mm,
it is kind of necessary. I feel like you can't really see the rest of the room until your back's up against the wall, which, oh my God, I
totally.
just thought of that. That it was bars. That was really good.
That was so. I. That was so good. That was
Thank you.
so good.
Oh,
Clip that shit.
yeah, I gotta write that down.
That's fantastic. No, but you can't really see it unless your back's up against the wall. I mean,
Yeah,
it's people do their best thinking, and some people don't, but a lot of people do their best thinking with their backs up against the wall or in
absolutely.
confinement. I mean, I find I'm the most creative in limitations or within
Hmm.
limitations, right? Like if I have certain parameters, I am a creative beast. If I have no parameters, I'm like, we could do one thing. Like this one thing seems okay, but if we're in confined, oh my God, I have 30 ideas, you know?
Yeah.
How interesting.
I
I
think it's
love
so
that you said
crazy
that.
because, like, we brought this up in a previous episode talking about water, where it's like you grow up and you think when I turn the tap on, the water will be clean and I can drink it and it will always flow, unless, something's wrong in my house and like the pipe broke, but it's not going to be the infrastructure. We'll always
Yeah.
have water. That's not true. And now that it's not true, when people are adapting to the idea that this is not true all of the time, it makes you do revolutionary things with how you how you integrate water into your life. So I feel like that's just like such a tiny example, but it's like the structure that you live under has to change when you
Mm,
realize it's not working anymore. And now you
hmm.
have to do something else. So it doesn't feel like a revolution, but it kind of is because you're changing, you're uprooting the way that you think about everything. I think another really good example and something that I hope we talk about later in this podcast is the ideas around transphobia. I think this one is huge because people cannot get over transphobia because in order to do that, you need to acknowledge that gender isn't real. And a lot of people just cannot do it.
Yeah.
It's not even if they wanted to, they
Right.
can't get there in their
Right.
minds.
And they don't
So
know how to because
right.
it's like, well, and I honestly, I don't understand the hatred and the vitriol. I don't understand that.
People don't
Well,
hate what they don't understand. Like
yeah,
it's
that is true.
scary.
And and again, like if you're saying like undermining, it is just kind of crazy because like it was like trans people just existing and then all of a sudden they were thrust into the spot. It was like also I remember specifically the time period when it was like trans visibility and then they're like, "Can we just go back to invisibility?" Like
Right.
please. Um that would be like better than this vitriol, but you're totally right. Like it's such a revolutionary idea to a lot of people and it's such a threatening idea to a lot of people because they're like, what do you mean gender isn't real? Because if I'm a not if I'm a woman, I am a woman. If I've based my whole personality and life on what society's expectations of a woman is, does that render my life meaningless?
Right. No, and I think that's
And
so interesting because
yeah.
as and both of us are cis women, and
Mhm.
I think I've had to hold it in both hands because I remember at the beginning I had to. So I read into this article where this person was saying, I knew I felt like a woman, and I was like, oh my God, what does that mean?
Yeah.
What does feeling like a woman mean? I don't know.
Yeah.
And just something, and that really started it. And luckily, I've been able to have a lot of conversations with trusted people who know more than me.
Yeah.
And that was really great. But I'm still in this process always of having to hold like power to the people.
Yep.
You live and let live. You get to do what you need to do, and I will always support you. With also knowing I have so much more to unpack about my
Yeah.
concepts, about everything
Yeah.
and how things have been structured and how I've moved throughout the world as a result of those structures.
Yes.
And it's a delicate thing and it's difficult, but it needs to happen. It's the only way
100%.
out of the mess that we're in
Yeah.
across the board in all of the issues.
When we get to Pride Month, we'll definitely
Oh yeah.
also not to confine these conversations to just Pride Month or the revolution to well,
Well,
this episode's going to premiere outside of February, Black History Month. But
Well, no,
Like,
that's revolutionary as well. Pride Month is no longer recognized by the government, so we can celebrate Pride anytime we
oh,
want.
true. Yes. But we'll do an episode on this because
Yeah,
yeah. And
for
all I'll
sure.
say, all I'll leave people with is just be kind. We're all people.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's
Well,
just be kind.
so I think we've talked about big things. We talked about big revolutions, small revolutions, revolutionary thinking. Let's get into, our favorite conversation. What are people getting wrong about
Wrong about it.
revolutions?
Yeah. Exciting. Oh, I mean, I have questions here, but I think you hit one of the things already, which is third parties and
Yes.
other options, getting people to think outside the box and actually act on it.
hmm That's actually where this idea for this episode came about. It was during the election season of 2024. I was seeing online constantly people being like, this isn't the time to vote for a third party. This will never work. And who do I vote for? They're both bad. I'm not sure what to do. And so for me, it's not that I think making an impossible choice is going to lead to, doing a lesser of two evils thing is going to lead to someone evil winning, which is unfortunate, but that was what was on the table. But I think the thing that people are getting the most wrong about this is that they're not prioritizing thinking outside of the systems that they were handed at birth. And these same systems that I think across the aisle, me, you, your neighbor, the guy down the street with the Trump flag, we all agree that it's not working. And we still had to operate inside of these choices that were not created by us and weren't made for us either.
Mm-hmm. Well said. I think I completely agree. And I think it's such an interesting moment to be looking back on it because I also will say, for what it's worth, I saw this in liberal circles. I didn't see it in conservative circles, which I respect. It was like if a conservative leaning person voted for a third party, like, okay. But the Democratic Party has always been the most threatened by third parties.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, if you vote for anyone other than the blue candidate, you are directly responsible for the blue candidate losing.
Yeah.
And you are fucked. Like, you hate our country. And I mean, I just remember every year, every freaking election year, it's like this. And
every time.
Every time. And we're going to talk soon about our obsession with binaries, and that deeply is at play here. But to me, it's like, oh my God, we can't even they want us to stay stuck. They want us to stay stuck. Are we going to challenge that? Are we going to have our own agency? Are we going to say, no, this is not what we want? 3.5%, which
we should.
I would actually be curious to see. I think that's similar numbers to like third party electoral votes.
Literally.
So,
but it's just discouraging the whole time.
Yeah, I know.
I think especially watching the election, one thing I saw a lot was, and this is, one of my brothers voted for Trump both times and never voted before or in any other election besides those two, which was infuriating to watch.
Yep.
But, to each their own. At a certain point, I started realizing, I was like, our politics are similar. We want to have a home. We want to have enough money to pay for our bills. We want to be safe with our families. We want to have a nice time. That's what the people want. All these other things are kind of superfluous, kind of handed to you as problems that aren't yours, and you have to ignore all the actual ones, which is I can't afford eggs. But I think the largest conflict that we're actually having is that in determining who we think is qualified for the things that we all want. So for Republicans, they'll be like, yeah, everyone like me should get those things. And then Democrats are also like, yeah, everyone like me should also get those things. But if you live in Texas, fuck you. It's not, we're all just divided on who deserves it. But it's actually are we talking about inalienable rights or not?
Yeah. Oh my God. I love the way you just said that. I love that so much. Are we talking about inalienable rights or not?
It does not say RSVP on the Statue of Liberty. But I think it is I don't know. It's just so funny to watch because it's like, we're just worried about the wrong things all of the time. You know that we all agree on just the most important things that are happening here. And all we need is
Absolutely.
3.5%. And we have it.
Yep, we have it. We have it, guys. So,
We always have.
I mean, yeah, shit. I mean, okay, let's just recap here because at this point we've talked about what revolution means,
Mm-hmm.
how it shows up at a lot of different levels
Yes.
in our own thoughts, governmentally, etc. I mean, when is it time for one? Is it time for one now? Like, do we have what it takes? Because it seems like we have what it takes.
Mm-hmm.
How do we know? Where do we go from here?
Here's my revolutionary thought. I thought about it today, but I think that it is true. I think maybe I've always thought this quietly. The time for revolution is always going to depend on the will of the people. But with that said, revolution is inevitable at every step and is always occurring in some form or another. So I think that's one thing that I want to leave this conversation with is an understanding that revolution is inevitable. There is no way, it is not sustainable that things will continue the way that they are without intervention of the people at some point. People are intervening at every point. It's just, what are we going to latch onto as a public? What are we going to let get silenced? How are we going to let these histories be told? Because a revolution is constantly happening. But I think it just really comes down to understanding that it's always happening. You are implicated whether you know it or not.
Mm-hmm.
And the choices that you make every day are either for or against revolution. And that's not meant to be pressure. It's just meant to say, the revolution is already here. When they say the revolution is not going to be televised, I always have I've thought about this question since I first heard that poem in like high school.
Yeah.
And I was like so confused. I was like, well, where is it going to be? Is it going to be on the radio? Like, I don't understand. Yeah. But I think really it just comes down to it's always. And they're not going to put it on TV because you're not supposed to know that it's happening. You're not supposed to get involved, but you are involved.
Yes.
And
100%.
I think people should know that.
Oh, I love that so much. I think so too. I mean, I don't know. I get like goosebumps thinking about Fred Hampton and, the Black Panther Party and how that was suspiciously absent from most of my education.
Oh, that's so weird.
Funny. And that revolution was very, very peaceful until the FBI made it violent.
Isn't it funny how that works?
So weird.
It usually doesn't get violent until the state gets involved. That's so weird.
It's like so odd how that happens.
I really miss that.
Seems like something that should be discussed further. But yeah, anyways, I mean, I think about like the revolutions that did occur and still how they're obscured,
Mm-hmm.
And
they have to be, or else we'll know that we can do it.
Right. I mean, again, Fred Hampton, what an icon for, like, if people, like, the worst characterization of the Black Panther Party you could have, like, that people are like, oh, it was, kill all the whites, whatever. Sure. The, like, Rainbow Coalition, like, breakfast program, like, let's look at mutual aid. Like, the Black Panther Party did so many beautiful things for the community, like, and we're just going to turn a blind eye to that because there's negative perception out there or there's like stuff around there. Like, it just,
you know what?
It was very revolutionary and it still is.
It certainly was. And also, so Claire and I, if you don't know, we used to work at Participant. And one of the films that I worked on was Lowndes County and the Road to Black Power, which is about the origins of the Black Panther Party. So fascinating to hear some of these stories and also to just kind of understand how close it is to us today. And so I think that's really interesting. Were you there? Did you work on Judas and the Black Messiah?
I did not work on it, but I was there during the time. Those
are good movies.
I hear, phenomenal. And, of course, my friends worked on it and did a beautiful job bringing that film out into the world. And I mean, I'm so glad Participant was telling those stories.
Me too.
And that again, I just think what a disservice that has been done to the Black Panther Party.
Absolutely.
I mean, they're also, I would love to just leave folks with the fact that like it's not gone.
No,
None of the
not at
revolutions
all.
are gone. Angela Davis, my girl, is still very much here. Like
Mhm.
there are people still here, still doing this work. We can still be doing this work, and we're a part of it. Again,
Yeah, I mean,
whether
I
we're
think
intentional
it's
or not.
yeah, and I think it's something to say too about like, yes, Angela Davis is still here, and then I also hear people all the time saying like, Gen Z is going to save us. No, they won't.
No,
It it's not. You don't need to wait for
I'm Gen
Angela to
Z.
step in. You don't need to wait for Gen Z to step in.
Yeah.
It is all of us, all of the time. You don't need to have a PhD in revolutions to do something revolutionary.
Yeah.
It is actually these small efforts that mean something. I really hope that what
Yes.
we're doing on this podcast is revolutionary or will become revolutionary with practice and,
Yep.
keeping putting ourselves out there and having these conversations. It's really just the intention of all of this.
Yeah.
I think like revolution, I'm thinking, as I was thinking about the word a lot, writer, former English major person, where I'm like, revolution as a cycle, revolution as in being open minded enough to hear or spark or learn something new about how we see the world. All of these things are revolutionary. All of these things matter. And there are just ways to continue being critical at every step so that you can find a new way forward. And it can't be what we did in the past because it obviously didn't work. Like there is, and especially what we were saying earlier about the United States, we're such a young country. We need to be revolutionary all of the time in order to make it what it was supposed to be. It's not an example of making America great again. That's not how a country that is founded on revolution would work. That doesn't make sense.
Oh,
I'm
bars.
spitting right now. This is crazy.
This is so good. Okay, well, you want to take us home with a quote? You want me to take us home with this quote?
I don't care.
Okay.
But,
I mean,
okay.
I think you go. You're
Okay.
spitting right now. Yeah.
Okay, this quote's from Bill Ayers. I wanted to end it with this because I think it's so good. Every revolution seems impossible at the beginning, and after it happens, it was inevitable. I think that's so true.
Chef's kiss.
In
What a way to
hindsight,
end.
we'll look back and be like, obviously it's this way.
Yeah.
So let's get into it. Always.
I love that. Oh man, what a great conversation. This I feel inspired. Maybe I'll go to I probably won't go to a protest, but
Do a small one.
Yeah. It's just me here. But
yeah, with your sign.
Yeah. Well, thanks everyone for listening. And
thank you so much.
We'll see you next time.
Well, wait, I have to tell the people.
What do you have
If
to
you're
tell
listening to this
people?
episode, I think this is such like a rich topic. I could talk about this literally all day. I talk about it all the time. But if there is something else you want to add, let us know in the comments at our website, carrotimpact.com/oftenwrong. You can put it in the comments on Spotify. You can do it on YouTube. You could do it on Apple Podcasts. You can do it on our Instagram. But we definitely want to hear from you. Did we get something wrong? Did we misspeak about one of these? Is there another revolution we should have used as a better example? We want to hear about it. Just let us know. And maybe we'll bring it up on our reaction podcast, which should come in 2 episodes from now.
Or more.
Maybe.
TBD. We'll see. We'll see.
We'll see how it
We'll do
goes.
it when we feel like it.
Yeah.
When we feel like we've been wrong enough.
Yeah. If we've been, admonished enough.
Yeah. Oh man.
All right. Thanks everybody so much.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
Talk to you soon.
Often Wrong is produced by Lisa Nwankwo, Claire Cornetta, and Joe Abdella. This episode was shot and edited by Joe Abdella. Special thanks to Michael Drummonds. Often Wrong is a Carrot Impact podcast. Go to carrotimpact.com/oftenwrong to learn more.